All right, so today we're going to really dig into how technology can be used to help people make lasting changes to their health, especially when it comes to heart health.
Yeah, cardiovascular disease is such a crucial area, and there's so much happening right now with digital health trying to tackle this.
It's really remarkable when you think about it. You've given us a ton of information to work with, 2 research articles, proposals, university summaries, even presentation slides.
Yeah, it's a real mixed bag. It gives us a good overview of what's going on.
It does.
Yeah.
And because there's so much to get to, let's start with something big picture. The European Health Data Space, the EHDS.
Okay.
This IDERA project caught my eye. They're using actual lung cancer data to try and make one of the first data spaces that actually lines up with the EHDS standards, which is ambitious to say the least.
It's hugely ambitious. I mean, think about what they're trying to do. It's like putting together a puzzle, but instead of a picture, it's medical records and genomic data, even stuff from wearable sensors.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really complex puzzle.
And all those pieces have to fit together perfectly. That's what the EHDS is trying to do, create a standardized way to bring all this information together.
Because otherwise it's just a mess of information, right? Like, how do you make sense of it all?
Exactly. Imagine a patient's medical history scattered across different hospitals, each with their own systems. It'd be impossible to get a clear picture. That's where standards like FHIR come in. It's like a universal translator for all that data.
So no more needing to speak a dozen different medical data languages.
Yeah.
Just one will do.
Exactly.
That's reassuring. But you mentioned IDERA is actually doing this. What kind of hurdles are they running into?
Well, one of the biggest is just the sheer amount of data. One of the research papers you fared actually looked at 36 different projects related to the EHDS.
36.
36. And it just shows how big this is and why getting it right from the start is so important.
It's setting the standard for everything else.
Exactly. And another crucial takeaway from the IDERA project is this focus on something called patient-generated health data, or PGHD.
Oh yeah, that's becoming more and more important. Isn't that basically data that patients are collecting themselves?
Right. So things like symptoms, they're experiencing their quality of life, how they feel about the care they're getting. It gives us a direct view into the patient's experience.
And that's something we haven't really been able to capture before, right? I mean, traditional medical data only tells part of the story.
Exactly. IDERA is looking at using things like PROMs and PRIMs. Those are standardized questionnaires that patients can fill out about their health and their experience with their care.
It's giving patients a voice in their own care in a way we haven't really seen before.
And that's a massive step towards patient-centered care.
It makes me think about that other study you shared, the one about creating a digital companion to help patients after they leave the hospital, after something like a heart attack.
Oh, yes. That paper was fascinating. The researchers actually brought together heart patients and healthcare professionals to help design this digital tool together.
Oh, wow. So they're getting input directly from the people who will actually be using it.
Exactly. It's not just researchers in a lab making guesses about what patients need.
That's smart. What were some of the biggest needs that came out of that?
Well, they found that these patients going from hospital to rehab often felt this mix of being overwhelmed, anxious, and uncertain. They didn't know what to expect. So they designed this digital companion to address 3 main things: helping patients find their way, giving them a sense of calm, and providing motivation.
Okay. I can see how all those would be really important during a time like that. It's one thing to be told you're being discharged, but then what?
Right. You're home, but you're also maybe a bit scared about what happens next.
It's a vulnerable time for sure. So how would this companion actually help?
So let's say you've just gotten home after a heart attack. The companion could give you personalized information about what to expect during rehab, what to do, how to deal with any problems that come up.
So instead of being handed a stack of pamphlets at the hospital, they get this interactive guide on their phone or tablet.
Exactly. And it can be tailored to their specific needs. And because we were talking about feeling overwhelmed, it can make things much easier to understand. They even talked about including things like interactive maps and videos to make the information more engaging.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about that feeling of anxiety? Because I imagine that doesn't just disappear when you get home.
It really doesn't. The digital companion could include things like guided meditations, breathing exercises, even just calming music to help patients manage that stress.
It's like having a little pocket therapist available 24/7, which I imagine would be really reassuring for a lot of people. And then there's that motivation piece. How do you keep people going when they're facing these big lifestyle changes?
That's where personalization is really important. The companion could track their progress, set goals that make sense for them, and provide encouragement along the way.
I love that they're really thinking about the whole person, not just the physical aspects of heart health, but the mental and emotional ones too.
It's all connected. And involving the patients in the design process led to some really innovative ideas.
Oh, like what?
One that comes to mind is they came up with this idea to have a heart mascot for the app. They even thought about weaving helpful information into a patient love story to make it more engaging and memorable.
Wow. That's thinking outside the box. I like it. But it makes me wonder, how are these digital companions actually built and tested? It seems like it would take a ton of collaboration and resources.
It does. And it's a complicated process, but you actually highlighted a project that addresses this. The Modular Open Research Platform, or MORE.
MORE. Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, MORE is basically trying to be a one-stop shop for digital health research. It gives people the tools and resources they need to design, build, test, and even launch their digital health tools all in one place.
So instead of everyone having to start from scratch every time, they can build on what's already there.
Right. Which is so important in a field that's moving as fast as digital health. New technologies are always popping up.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the things I really liked about MORE was their focus on getting everyone involved. They actually used this Delphi-inspired process to get feedback from all kinds of people, researchers, developers, even healthcare professionals.
They knew that to make a platform that people would actually use, they needed to hear from everyone involved in the digital health world.
It's that whole collaborative spirit again. It's recognizing that this is something we have to do together.
And it really speaks to this bigger issue of making digital health research last. It's not about just building a cool app and forgetting about it. It has to be designed in a way that makes sure it can be kept up to date and that it can have a real impact for years to come. It's like building a house. You wouldn't just build the walls and the roof and say you're done.
Right.
You need a good foundation, plumbing, electrical, all the things that make sure it lasts. And that actually reminds me of another aspect of making these changes stick: shared decision making, or SDM.
Right, SDM. It seems like that's becoming a really key part of this whole conversation about sustainable behavior change.
It really is, because the old way of doing things where the doctor tells the patient what to do, that's not really working so well anymore.
No, definitely not. Healthcare is really starting to recognize that patients need to be in the driver's seat when it comes to their own health.
They're the experts in their own lives, right? SDM is about acknowledging that and giving them a real voice in their care.
It makes perfect sense.
Right.
When people feel like they're part of the process, they're much more likely to actually follow through.
Exactly. And you actually shared some research on this, specifically how digital tools can support SDM in something like cardiac rehab.
Yes. One of the studies focused on this app called Active Plan, which was specifically designed to help with SDM in cardiac rehab. They actually used this tool called the Op-Chain scale to measure how much shared decision-making was actually happening during those doctor's appointments.
It's not enough to just have the app right. You have to see if it's actually making a difference in those conversations between patients and their doctors.
Exactly. And those conversations can be tricky to measure, which is why they also use something called thematic analysis to really dig into the details of those interactions.
So it's not just about what they talked about, but how they talked about it. What were the nuances of that conversation?
Right. Exactly. What were some of the things they learned from all that?
One of the biggest takeaways was just how important that relationship between the patient and their doctor really is. They found that patients often saw the app as like a symbol of that relationship.
So it's almost like a bridge between those in-person appointments.
Exactly. It helps them feel connected even when they're not face-to-face with their doctor.
Which makes sense, because that transition from hospital to home can be really isolating for people.
And on the topic of the app itself, the study found that how doctors introduced the app to their patients really mattered. It wasn't enough to just hand it to them and say, here, use this. The doctors who were most successful really took the time to explain how the app worked, how it could help them, and how it could support their role in making decisions about their health.
It's about making it a part of that conversation, not just some separate thing.
Right. And they also found that having some kind of structure within the app itself could be really helpful, something to guide both the patient and the doctor through the steps of shared decision making.
So it's almost like a roadmap for the conversation. Make sure you're hitting all the important points.
Exactly. You know, thinking about frameworks like that makes me think about this bigger idea of sustainable behavior change. We've talked about tools and technologies, but it's so much bigger than that, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the articles you shared summed it up perfectly. It's not just about changing one specific thing someone is doing. It's about giving them the power to make lasting changes that improve their whole lives.
Yeah.
Right? It's about making it part of who they are, not just something they do.
And the article talked about 3 key things that make sustainable behavior change more likely: capability, opportunity, and motivation.
Okay, so capability, opportunity, motivation. Let's break those down a bit. What does that actually mean in practice?
Sure. So capability means you have the knowledge, the skills, the resources to actually make the change. Let's say we're talking about being more active after you've had a heart attack. Capability means you understand why exercise is good for you, you know how to do it safely, and you have access to places or equipment to help you do it.
Okay, so you're set up for success, basically.
Yeah.
You have the tools you need.
Right. And then opportunity, that's about having a supportive environment that makes it easier to make that change.
So going back to the exercise example, that might look like having safe places to walk or bike, or maybe having friends and family who are encouraging you to stay active.
Absolutely. It's about having that support system in place. And then there's motivation.
Which can be a tricky one, right? Because you can have all the tools and resources in the world, but if you're not motivated to actually use them, it's not going to work.
That's where digital health can really shine. They can use things like gamification, personalized feedback, social connections, all these things that tap into what motivates us as humans.
It's about making it fun and engaging, not just another chore on your to-do list.
Exactly. But as we've been talking about, sustainable change requires a much more holistic approach. It's about looking at the whole person, their life, their environment. And that brings us to this idea of learning health systems, or LHS.
Ah, yes, LHS.
Yeah.
You mentioned those earlier. They're basically systems that are designed to learn and adapt over time.
Right.
They use data to figure out how to deliver better care and get better results.
Exactly. And the article made the point that LHS are absolutely crucial for creating a healthcare system that actually supports lasting behavior change.
Yeah.
Imagine a system that's constantly gathering information from electronic health records, wearable sensors, even things like social media, and then using that information to personalize treatment plans, identify potential risks, and provide support that's tailored to each individual patient.
That's incredible. It's like having a healthcare system that evolves with you, learns as you learn.
That's the goal. But of course, there are challenges too. We have to think about things like data privacy and security and make sure these systems aren't biased in any way.
Right. Those are big questions, and we have to be really careful about how we use all this data. It's powerful, but it has to be used responsibly and ethically.
I completely agree. And, on the topic of challenges, another one that often comes up is digital literacy.
Right? Not everyone is tech savvy. How do we make sure these tools are accessible to everyone, regardless of their age, their technical skills, their background?
It's a huge question because we can't create a system where only certain people have access to these tools. And then there's the issue of interoperability. We need to make sure all these different digital tools can actually talk to each other, that they can share information easily and securely.
Yeah. Otherwise, it just creates more silos and fragmentation, which definitely doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
We also have to talk about cost, because developing and maintaining these technologies is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure it's not just the wealthy who benefit from these innovations?
It's about making sure everyone has a fair shot at good health, not just those who can afford it.
Exactly. And I imagine that will take collaboration not just within healthcare, but across different industries and sectors.
It's a team effort for sure. But even with all those challenges, it feels like there's a lot of excitement around digital health right now. It feels like we're on the cusp of something really big.
We're just starting to see what's possible. I'm really curious to see where this all goes next. But, since we're talking about digging deeper into what's possible, let's shift gears a bit and talk about one specific area that I found really interesting. Using something called program theory to design these digital health interventions.
Oh yes, program theory. It's a fascinating area. One of the articles you share actually used something called intervention mapping to figure out the underlying program theory of that active plan app we were just talking about.
Right, intervention mapping. It's basically a step-by-step guide for developing interventions that are based on evidence and theory, which seems like a good idea when you're talking about something as complex as behavior change.
Absolutely. It's like having a roadmap to guide you through the process of figuring out exactly what needs to change and how to actually make that change happen. What's interesting about this particular study is that they actually started with the app that already existed and used intervention mapping to kind of take it apart and figure out what made it tick.
Oh, that's interesting. So instead of building something new from scratch, they were reverse engineering something that already existed.
Exactly. And by doing that, they were able to identify 4 key behaviors that contribute to someone being physically active in a way that's good for their heart. Setting goals, making plans, keeping track of their progress, and having strategies for dealing with challenges.
It's about breaking down this big goal of being more active into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right. And they also found 8 personal things that can affect those behaviors. Things like self-efficacy, motivation, knowledge, social support, whether they see the benefits of being active or if they see more barriers.
It's all about understanding the individual right. What works for one person might not work for another. And it sounds like this approach really tries to get at those individual factors.
Exactly. And for each of those factors, they came up with specific things they wanted to change. For example, if someone doesn't believe they can be physically active, the goal might be to help them feel more confident in their ability to actually do it.
It's getting really specific and targeted.
Yeah.
It's moving away from these vague ideas of motivation or knowledge and really getting into the nitty-gritty of what needs to change.
Yes. And what's great about this approach is that you can then link those very specific changes to features in the app itself and the techniques that app is using to try to make those changes happen.
So, for example, the Active Plan app has this activity planner feature that lets people schedule their workouts. That could be linked to that behavior change technique we talked about, action planning.
Exactly. And by mapping out all those connections, you end up with this visual representation of how the whole thing is supposed to work. It's like a blueprint for behavior change.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I bet it's helpful not just for the people designing these tools, but also for the people using them. It makes the whole process more transparent and understandable.
Exactly. And it helps you see where the intervention might not be working as well as it could. For example, if we find that the Active Plan app isn't really addressing the need for social support, we might add features that connect people with others who are going through the same thing, kind of create that sense of community.
It's using what you learn to constantly improve the tool. I like that a lot. It takes a systematic approach, but it also leaves room for flexibility and adaptation.
And I think that's key when we're talking about something as complex as behavior change. It's not one size fits all.
It's like they say, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And having that clear theory gives you something solid to actually measure and track.
Exactly. It helps us move away from just building things that look good on paper to building things that actually work for real people in a way that lasts.
And that brings us back to this idea of patient empowerment, something we've touched on a few times today.
It's really the common thread running through all of this, isn't it? From these huge beta sharing initiatives like the EHDS to the way we design these digital tools to the actual science behind how we change our behaviors.
It really is. So as we start to wrap up our deep dive today, I'm curious to hear your take on what patient empowerment actually looks like. What do we need to be doing to make sure we're putting patients at the center of their own healthcare journeys?
It's a big question and there's no easy answer. But I think it starts with recognizing that patients aren't just passive bystanders in their own care. They have knowledge, experiences, preferences, all these things that are essential for making good decisions about their health.
It's about moving away from that old doctor knows best model to something that's more collaborative, more empowering.
Absolutely. And digital health has a huge role to play in that these technologies can give people access to information they can use to make decisions about their own health. They can make it easier to talk to their doctors and be a part of the decision-making process. They can even connect people with others who are going through similar things so they don't feel so alone.
It's about creating a healthcare system that really listens to patients and values what they have to say.
And not just listens, but actually acts on what it hears.
Exactly. We've covered so much today, from these big picture ideas about data sharing and infrastructure to the very personal journey of changing your behavior.
And we've seen how all these different pieces are connected, how they all fit together in this constantly changing world of digital health.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
And I always learn so much from talking to you.
Me too. There's always something new happening in this field.
That's for sure. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there for today. But as always, we'll be sure to link to all the research we talked about in the show notes so you can check it out for yourselves.
And remember, this is just the beginning. The world of digital health is always evolving. So stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.